All right, good morning everybody. This is Mason. I'm your sometimes guest host out here at the Headwaters at the Comal. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are actually kind of nearing the end of the excavations here. We're kind of on the home stretch, and this is actually kind of nearing the end of our live video updates as well. This is going to be our next to last video. Next week we're going to have sort of a last one. We'll have lots of celebrity guest stars. Tom Cruise might stop by. Maybe. We'll see. You might have to tune in to find out. But I wanted to go ahead and kind of give you an update on some of the things that have been going on. And you may also be wondering where Mindy is or where Josh Hill is. Mindy is out for the day, and Josh is out for the rest of the excavation. He took a great opportunity at the Lower Colorado River Authority as an archaeologist for them. The LCRA is a public utility that's here in the Central Texas area, and so he has taken a great opportunity to go and join them as a principal investigator. And so he is not out here anymore. He may be watching. If he is, we would just like to say good luck to you, Josh. Anyway, so let's get back to the excavations. Right now we're standing in Block B, which is, as of C, thank you, Noel, Block C, which has, at this point, all of the test units have been opened up, and they are conducting the excavations in here, getting down to about a meter below the surface in some of the units here. And then in other areas, they're a little bit shallower, like over here on this end, probably closer to about 30 or 40 below the surface. The feature density, this was, as you might recall, some of the earlier updates that we've had. This area had lots and lots of really small hearth features and lots of different artifacts, and especially lots of faunal remains. We are still finding a lot of bone and a lot of artifacts coming out, but the actual numbers of features themselves is actually dropping off as we've gone deeper. You can see this is feature 60 something. I don't know the number, but this is the only feature that's been exposed in this whole block right now in these lower depths. That doesn't mean that we're at the end. There could be more down there, but for now this is kind of the only rock hearth feature that we see. There are some burned rocks in here. I see a little piece of charcoal right there, and some flakes that are there's a flake right here. You can kind of see. So this is still definitely some activity area, but the density of that occupation in at least these soil elevations is a lot lower. So there may be more down below. They're going to keep working and they're going to find out. So over in Block B, which was one that has been largely abandoned, it's on the other side, we can't see it right now, but over there, last week they dug a big deep trench to try to explore and see if there are any well-preserved, really early archaeological deposits down there, what we call Paleo-Indian deposits, some of the earliest occupations in the New World. And that trench went down to about 5 meters. And we didn't find anything in that trench at that depth because we hit the water table.
How many feet is 5 meters?
5 meters. The general gauge is about a meter is about a yard, so about 3 feet. It's a little bit more than that, but roughly. So 5 meters is going to be about 15, 16 feet down. So a long ways. And in that case, that trench filled up with water because we actually reached the level below the surface where groundwater is sitting. And so once we dug that trench into that water, we really couldn't dig anymore with any real practicality. And there are some pictures on our blog post for this week where you can kind of see how just genuinely unpleasant it is to work with soil that's essentially all just sticky, gross mud. And by the way, thank you for the question. And if anybody has any questions, please put them in the comment section on your right side, which is my left over here somewhere, or put them in the comments down below. And always, as always, just like and subscribe. We'd love to have you find out when our last video is coming up, which will be next week. Block C, this is where we are. Block A, which is over there, the one that we've been checking in from quite often. Block A is down to about 1.5 meters, so about 5 to 6 feet roughly. And in that block, they're starting to reach a gravel lens where it's just lots of little small rocks. It has some artifacts and some features inside that gravel, but for the most part, it's just a whole lot of little rocks, and that makes things really difficult to decipher what's a feature rock versus just a rock. And so there's been a little bit more head scratching in there to deal with that, but in general they're continuing the excavations down there, but they're kind of nearing what we expect is going to be kind of near the end of that block as well. We might check in from that one next week. So also last week, or maybe the week before, we had a specialist from Texas State University come out and do some archaeomagnetic dating on some of the features inside block A. And so what's archaeomagnetic dating? Well, let me tell you. We did a whole section earlier, a whole video about dating in archaeology, and this is another technique. We did touch on it very briefly in that discussion, but a little bit more detail. It's another method that we can use to identify the age of rocks, mostly rocks, but you can also do it with some clays, I'm pretty sure, but it's mostly, my experience with it has been with rocks. And so essentially what happens is these rocks here, they have iron particles inside them, and when they're heated, the iron particles sort of go in all different directions and things like that, but then when they're heated and they get really hot, the iron particles all have fluidity and they can move, and they all wind up orienting to whatever is magnetic north at that point. And then when it cools off, they lock into place at whatever that magnetic north position is. And so assuming that a rock is heated and left in place and never moved, whatever that magnetic north is inside that rock is what that magnetic north position was at that time when it was heated. And the interesting part of that is that we now know that the Earth's magnetic field moves around, and the North Pole moves all the time. And in fact, it flips back and forth every, I can't remember what the scale is, but it's thousands and thousands of years. It'll actually go, the North Pole actually switches and becomes the South Pole, and then it switches back. But in between those switches, the North Pole actually moves around across the surface of the Earth in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we know how that North Pole has moved over time, and so we can use archaeomagnetic dating to actually find what was magnetic north at that spot when that rock was heated, compare it to where we know the magnetic North Pole was at certain times, and then we'll know how old that rock is. It's a whole lot of whiz-bang science that I don't really know the answers to how it works specifically, but that's the general gist of it. So that work was done. It involves like a drill, a hollow drill, and you drill out a piece of the rock itself, and you have to do really precise measurements of where it's sitting and where it's oriented, and then you take it to some specialist who does something with it, I don't know, and then they come back and they give you what the date is. So that's archaeomagnetic dating, and so they're in the process right now of, they took some of the rocks kind of like these, and they were able to extract the samples to do the dating off of that. So, and then over in Block D, that's the one that's the really deep one. You can see the white tint over there. No real updates over there right now because they've essentially dug down to the bottom. They've reached what's essentially the bottom, and so now it's just sort of waiting for the last recording and then to get filled up. So that is the latest from the excavation. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in there. But while that's going on, we're going to kind of head over here because we're going to talk a little bit about, I entitled this video, Why on Earth Are We Here? Now let's watch Lauren fall over.
Nope. Not yet.
No? Okay. We're good. You guys are great. We have some students from Texas Lutheran University who are here, kind of learning about archaeology and everything else, all the other work that's going on. I got about 10 minutes, so let me get moving here. So this is about, this kind of deeper dive topic is going to get a little bit touchy-feely in a way. we're going to talk about why we're here, why we archaeologists are here working on this site right now. And we are what are called cultural resource management specialists. And in the United States, we have certain laws that manage archaeological resources and historic resources, and they're kind of an integral component of what we call the human environment. You can kind of see here, you might have, and these are different qualities of life. So we have, quality of life, we have ecological resources that we're all exposed to as humans, we have socioeconomic resources and health and recreation, and then we have cultural resources. And these might be endangered species or forests or wetlands. This might be park facilities, and this might be housing. All of these different things are integral parts of what it is to be a human living in our world. And these are the types of aspects of human life that we environmental specialists try to look at and manage. And so cultural resources are essentially archaeological resources, historic resources, also what we call traditional cultural properties, which are they are certain areas or settings that have a certain cultural significance to certain groups of people. They don't really fall into the archaeological category or into the historic resources category, but they're sort of in the middle. But and so under the laws that manage these resources, anytime there's a public development project, or sometimes even private development projects, like anytime you see a roadway expansion, or if you see a new airport being put in, have you guys ever seen, surveyors on the side of the road doing investigations as they're preparing for a new road or something like that? Essentially, these laws say you need to look and see if there are any really important archaeological sites that are there, or any important endangered species habitat, or any important wetlands, or will this project potentially disproportionately affect lower socioeconomic groups than other groups. And so all of these different environmental and human environment resources are all evaluated as part of these projects. And so we archaeologists look at the archaeological resources. And so we look around, and our job is to tell people who have to make those decisions if a project is going to impact important archaeological resources and what to do about it if they are. And so I kind of put this together. This is sort of a breakdown, a visual breakdown of how much of the work that we do as archaeologists is related to just field work. In fact, excavations like this constitute just this little tiny piece of the pie here. A lot of the work that we do, and even archaeologists who are on the other side of this process, who are the regulators who review these and make sure that we're looking out for important archaeological resources, a lot of projects are dealt with without even ever going out into the field at all. We just know areas that are important. We know the types of projects that have the potential to impact archaeological resources. And so these are just sort of handled very quickly. And then in other areas, we have to go out and actually look. That's called a survey. And so in surveys, a lot of our work is doing survey work. And so surveys often involves here's just some pictures, going out on an area where there's going to be some sort of a development, some sort of maybe a road, or in this case, this is a water pipeline that was being installed. And we actually dig in the ground and we look for archaeological sites. Here's a picture of our very own Noelle Steinley, who you've seen in several of the earlier videos. She's disappeared. She's over there. Working at Caddo Lake Wildlife Management Area up in northeast Texas. She's digging a shovel test. This was for they were doing some logging inside there, and they needed to make sure that that logging wasn't going to impact important archaeological sites. This is a picture of me looking at the Trinity River. I'm looking at the wall inside this Trinity River here. This is outside of Dallas, and seeing if there are any indications of sites kind of like these sitting in the bank of the Trinity River right there. And so in all of these cases, what we're doing when we go out and we do these surveys, this is a picture of backhoe trenching. Sometimes we can't reach them just by looking on the ground or digging with a shovel. Sometimes those sites might be down a lot deeper than we can reach with a shovel, so we'll use backhoes. But in all instances, surveys like this are all about finding a project footprint like this, and then investigating everything that's being proposed at a specific location to see if any important archaeological sites are there or if they aren't. And so that process is what a lot of the work that we do if we're out in the field is to go out and dig these holes in the ground, look around, find what's the important archaeological sites and what aren't. We have other cultural resource specialists who actually look for historic buildings that are important, neighborhoods, districts, and even in some instances we deal with built environment stuff, like these are Cold War era missiles that are, these are all aspects of our human heritage, some of which are important and some of which aren't. And so that's the important aspect of the term cultural resource management, is we're not protecting everything. It's not cultural resource protection, it's management, which means prioritizing the preservation and protection of the resources that are really important. And so one of our jobs is to go out and find the sites and then make the determination if something is important or it's not. So sometimes the sites are important. This is one of our archaeologists here working at the Texas Governor's Mansion. This is Emery. He was out at the site for a while. And so this is an important resource. So managing and identifying the archaeological resources that are at the site is an important part of what we're doing. And so because we want to know what's going on, because that sort of site is really important. We also don't necessarily just work on the land, because cultural resources are offshore as well. And so this is, again, this is Noel helping to tend a boat, because we were working on a shipwreck that was at the base of a bridge near Beaumont. And so this is a World War I shipwreck. And so this is an important, this is from a specific, very key aspect of American history during World War I. And so this wreck itself is a very important resource, and so we want to protect it, and we want to make sure that it isn't damaged or impacted as a result of public actions. And so that's what this was. This project was there to look for those sorts of resources. Many times we don't dig at all. This is yours truly trying desperately to figure out how to get this machine to run. This is a magnetometer. It uses electrified cesium vapor to measure the Earth's magnetic field. And so what you get is maps that are produced that show variability in the Earth's magnetic field that correspond to objects in the ground. This is from Mother Neff State Park. We did a survey here on behalf of Texas Parks and Wildlife because they were planning to put in a new camping area, and we wanted to find out what sorts of archaeological resources were there specifically related to the Civilian Conservation Corps. So a lot of the archaeological investigations we do aren't just really, really old sites like this one, which is thousands of years old. The Civilian Conservation Corps was in action and in operation during the Great Depression, which was from in the 1930s into the 1940s. So you're looking at 70, 80 years, and that's all. And in fact, legally, the cutoff is generally about 45 to 50 years for what is considered a potential for a historic resource, an important historic and archaeological resource. So those viewers out here who are approaching 50 years of age or are over it, you're actually archaeological age in the eyes of the law now, and I'm getting closer all the time. So, and so what we do is we go out and we look for these sorts of things. We look for these important archaeological sites, and then we produce reports like these. This is a report that was prepared several years ago for a bridge project in Oklahoma, crossing the Red River. And so essentially it's just a general summary of all of the work that was done, what we found, and our recommendations as professionals as to what's important and what's not, and whether the project should proceed as planned or if there might need to be modifications and what those modifications might need to be. And then this is the report on that Civilian Conservation Corps camp that I was showing you the map of. And it's another one, it's just a lot larger, but it's essentially the same thing, detailing all of the finds, what we think of all of those finds, and the recommendations that we make as a result of all of that. So that the people who are in charge of finally deciding what's important and what's not, have as much information about these resources as they can to make a good decision on what's worth saving and what's not. And then in instances where these sites are important, but we can't make any changes on the project, that's when these sorts of excavations happen. And that is what's called a data recovery, which means this site, these aspects of this site will be lost as a result of construction, but we want to try to preserve what we can as a way to offset the loss of that resource. And again, that's that management process where essentially we're not absolutely refusing any construction related to archaeological resources. We're just essentially saying, okay, if you need to proceed, there needs to be something to account for the loss of these resources. And so that's what these larger excavations are all about, is to preserve the data, to get something out of it, and to actually extract some information that future generations can learn from and future archaeologists can learn from, so that it isn't a total loss forever, essentially. And so then we produce these big giant reports like this that get into real detail about all of the excavations that were done, all of the finds, and provide insights and information for future groups to come out and learn more. And so we'll be producing a report like this down the road after these excavations are done. And so that's essentially what we're doing, because what we want to do is, as cultural resource managers, our job is to help account for what these resources are and account for their importance in our society and in our culture and as human beings, but also understand the practical aspects of our modern life, that we just can't save everything. And so we really focus on doing our best to find what's important and deal with those properly, and really let progress on those things that aren't quite as important. So I hope that makes sense for everybody. And so now we're at the last part of the video, which is questions. Do we have any questions from anybody?
We haven't had any questions come in online, but we've had a couple questions.
Okay, viewers, post a question if you have one.
This is a question I have. Because we're wrapping up the excavations, like, how do you know when you're done?
How do you know when you're done?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in this instance, there was a specific amount of dirt that we had to investigate as a means to compensate for the loss of the resource. And so in a lot of ways, in this site, that's how we know we're done. But like, how would we know?
So you didn't have
right.
a limit. Mm-hmm.
Right. If we didn't have a limit, well then technically we could just keep digging and digging everywhere. But if we were to go downward, we would know when it's time to stop when we're not finding anything else. We are getting to dirt that's older than people. Because in here, in the New World, people got here 14,000 years, maybe 15. It's the date does kind of tend to creep older and older as time goes on, but there's a lot of dirt that's a whole lot older than that's down there farther, but there's no point in digging into it because there won't be any people. But it really deals with, as far as laterally digging, how much of a site do you remove? It becomes a matter of, well, what are your research objectives? What are your goals in doing this excavation? Because we all would rather these sites are left alone, because there may be better ways to investigate these sites in the future, and we don't want to ruin these resources for future archaeologists to come along and where they could do even more from them. So we want to try to dig out as little as is necessary to get the information that we're trying to get, but then not dig any more. And so it really kind of comes down to, what are your research goals?
All right. And what can artifacts that you find tell you about a site? What does an artifact tell you?
Oh, artifacts can tell us a whole lot. They actually, not just the artifact itself, but there's certainly lots of information about, let's just say we found we'll use a flake as an example, a lowly little flake. We can actually look at that flake and look at the type of material that it's made out of, the rock, and we can actually do sourcing studies to figure out where that rock came from in the region. Chances are good that it probably came from somewhere near here, but there could be rocks that came from farther away, and we can use chemical analyses of a flake to find out where it came from. And from there you can figure out, well, if they're extracting rocks from farther away, why are they extracting those rocks from farther away when there are rocks over here? You can start to get into decision making, investigations, and start to get into the people's heads through that analysis. You can look at the flaking pattern on the rock to figure out how that flake was made, which can tell you information about tool making techniques, the tools that they're using. We had that one live video with Chris Ringstaff, who was doing flint knapping, and he showed you some of the different tools that are used. They all produce their own signatures of the on signature scarring and stuff on a flake that you can then look at and to get actual cultural patterning and information about what the people were doing and how they were making that tool. And then you could also look for wear marks to see if it was used as a tool to cut things. If it was used in that purpose, you could actually look for residue on a flake to find out potentially what it was used to cut. Was it used to cut meat, or was it used to cut plant materials? What were those plant materials? How old is it? Because those are organic remains that you can then use to radiocarbon date. There's a whole wealth of information that can come from just one individual lowly artifact. And so what we do is we get all of those artifacts and we look at all the different types of questions that can be answered from them. And so it's kind of like a symphony, essentially. You know, you might say that the flakes are bassoons and the tools are saxophones or whatever. And all of that comes together into one big unified story, or one big song.
Okay. And then we have a question from a viewer.
Yes.
What happens to the artifacts when you're done, and does anything need to be done to preserve them?
They are, the artifacts are actually all collected. They're all tagged and weighed and counted, and we keep track of everything that comes out of this site and where it came from in the excavation. So at any point, somebody in the future could come back and find out where an individual artifact came from. They're all cleaned, so that way they're not dirty and gross and getting mold inside a bag somewhere. And then eventually they are sent to what we call a curatorial facility. Those are required by law here in Texas to when we have to take out a permit to do excavations, like this project has a permit. Those actually go to a curatorial facility where those artifacts are stored for future archaeologists and researchers to come and access them and learn from them. And so in this case, these artifacts are going to Texas State University, to the Center for Archaeological Studies. But there's also one at the University of Texas. There's one at the Center for Archaeological Research down in San Antonio at UTSA. They're dotted all over the countryside, and essentially those are just where they go permanently. And they'll go there along with all of the notes and the photographs and just essentially everything that was produced from this excavation. It's all going to be available for future researchers.
All right, thanks, Mason.
Okay, well, I guess that's it for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope everybody had a good time. And again, this is our next to last video. So next week will be the last one, and we hope to see you there. And thank you so much, everybody who's been watching and keeping tuned. And it's been a real treat, and we'll just talk to you next time. Toodles.